The Gloriana set by ThebeMoon. Read by LMX Mabella. Chapter 39. Rhapsody. Hermione had every intention of breaking up with Theo Sunday morning when her courage was high and she was fresh off a marathon loop session. She couldn't keep bleating, "I'm with Theo," yet still allow Malfoy to flirt with her, touch her hair, hold her close when they danced, to kiss her on that broomstick. That needed to end. Not the flirting, touching and kissing from Malfoy. She was quite on board with that, but the situation with Theo. The Black-Hat Slytherin had been nothing but considerate, kind, and agreeable. See loop page 43, chart D. Didn't deserve to be left twisting in the wind. Hermione didn't know what would happen with Malfoy. Maybe it would work, and maybe it wouldn't. Maybe she'd end up with no handsome Slytherin at all, in which case she might actually have a decent chance of passing her nudes. Either way, Hermione rode in the pink light of dawn. The current state of affairs, pun intended, could not be allowed to continue. It wasn't fair to Theo or herself or even Malfoy. Malfoy might look all smug and confident now, but eventually he'd crack and Theo would end up as just a smoking burn mark on the Great Hall floor. Hermione flipped back to page 43, reviewing Theo's pros and cons chart, but it was a sad waste of time. A whole other Theo lay beneath the suave surface. She just knew it. She wondered if she would like the real Theo better or worse. Well, it would be another witch's job to crack that code. Theo would remain a beautiful, bound book, while Malfoy's burned and tattered pages lay open to her touch. So she was ready to act, but Theo wasn't waiting in the corridor when she left the portrait hall, and he wasn't at breakfast either. Malfoy was there, of course, but besides a subtle wink and a positively indecent display of spooning his oatmeal, he kept to himself. Hermione headed to the library after breakfast, hoping Theo would seek her out, but another Slytherin turned up instead.
"Thought I would find you here,"
Pansy said, perching herself on the table. She brought no books, of course, just a tiny seafoam green purse that matched her sweater dress. Her lips were painted a vivid pink. "You can't be here to study," Hermione said, looking her over. Pansy sneered.
"Certainly not. I have a life."
"Just because I study doesn't mean I don't have a life," Hermione remarked. "If anything, I have too much life. What I need is a little less life."
"I'm inclined to agree with you,"
Pansy said, crossing legs encased in stiletto boots.
"You're rubbish with men, Granger."
Hermione said nothing. She didn't need Pansy Parkinson to tell her that.
"Draco might be whistling around the southern dungeons these days," Pansy continued. "But now Theo's brooding. Spent last night drinking in a corner of the common room, looking dark and dangerous, attracting every brainless twit in the house."
Hermione felt even more wretched. She knew Theo resented his exclusion from Stock Club, and now she'd left him drinking alone while she swarmed around with Basile and Malfoy. Mean.
"But I'm not here to talk about Theo."
Pansy leaned forward, and Hermione caught a strong wave of flowery perfume.
"I want to know your plan."
Hermione raised her eyebrows. "I plan to study."
"Don't act stupid. What about Astoria?"
"I'm still researching," Hermione said. "These things can't be rushed."
Pansy rolled her eyes. "Only you could turn a revenge scheme into some swatchy study group. If this is a trick to get me to join porn—"
"Please, I know a lost cause when I see one," Hermione sniffed. People had to want to be helped. "My plan is in the research phase. Take it or leave it."
"Fine."
Pansy looked around the nearly empty library. Honestly, Hermione thought, was there no work ethic at Hogwarts, and lowered her voice farther.
"What do you want me to do?"
Hermione eyed the dark-haired witch for a moment and pulled a scroll from her bag. "Sign this." Pansy looked over the parchment as Hermione mentally reviewed the contents. "I, Pansy Parkinson, receiving party, promise to tell no one about any plan that Hermione Granger, disclosing party, chooses to share regarding Astoria Greengrass, target, either directly or indirectly, verbally or silently, through any physical, mental, emotional, or magical means. Any information that the receiving party uncovers on a disclosing party's behalf becomes the confidential property of the disclosing party and is covered under this agreement. Violating these terms will result in severe penalties, and the disclosing party will not be held responsible for any possible disfigurement that may occur."
The Slytherin gave Hermione a narrow look. "I am not signing this." Hermione plucked the contract out of her hands. "Then go away. I have work to do." She turned her attention back to arithmancy, but the other witch didn't move. Hermione hoped Pansy would make up her mind. That perfume was giving her a headache. She was surprised Neville could stand it. Pansy huffed. "Fine," she said again. She swiped both Hermione's quill and parchment and signed her name with a flourish. "I'd better not find myself covered in balls, Granger." "Well, that's up to you, Parkinson." Hermione smirked as she took back the quill and parchment. "Here's your assignment." She signed the contract herself and tucked it away, then drew out a piece of notebook paper. "Tie broomsticks." Pansy blinked. "Tie broomsticks?" "This is a list of questions. The library's Quidditch section should answer most of them, but you may have to go to quality Quidditch supplies as well." Pansy eyed Hermione thoughtfully from her perch on the table. "You're going to cast Astoria's broom?" "Please." Hermione looked pained. "Give me some credit." "Then why—" Hermione gave Pansy a look, and the Slytherin shut her painted mouth. "It will take ages to figure this all out," Pansy complained. "I need it tomorrow." Pansy looked shocked. "I have a date." "Break it." The witch's eyes narrowed again. "You want me to break my date with your precious Longbottom?" Hermione sighed. No, she didn't. She messed up enough people's lives around here. "Fine. Get me the information before breakfast on Tuesday. I expect a thorough job." Pansy nodded and tucked the parchment into her tiny purse. Hermione wondered if there was an expansion charm. Many of the top-end luxury purses featured them. Did it include a weightless one as well, like a beaded bag, or— "Focus, Granger," Pansy snapped. "I asked if there was anything else you needed." Hermione startled, then blinked at Pansy. "Yes, actually. Pigeons." "Pigeons?" "A flock of homing pigeons is harassing owls at the Owlery." Owls had displaced pigeons at the Wizarding World's primary messenger bird in the 1800s, and some pigeons still held a grudge. Hagrid had told her of Viti last week that an unusually large and vicious flock of pigeons had arrived at Hogwarts after the war and was attacking owls and interfering with deliveries. Obviously, Hagrid was way too soft on them. Hermione wondered if pigeons had caused Brownie's wounds. He wasn't a very big owl. "I'll need at least 3 pigeons on, let's say, Thursday," Hermione said. "Bring them to the patient's lab." Pansy's expression was ludicrous. "You want me to trap some nasty pigeons, or you bring some kind of bird thing?" Her eyes widened. "Are you going to turn Astoria into a pigeon?" "What? No." Now Hermione was rolling her eyes. "You're rubbish at this, Parkinson. Leave the planning to me, all right?" Pansy stood off the table and straightened her dress. "This had better be worth it, Granger." Hermione just gave her a thin smile. The rest of the Sunday brought Hermione no nearer to her goal regarding Theo. He appeared at lunch, to her relief, and she managed a brief chat with him in the entrance hall before she headed off to an afternoon hike with Hagrid. "I'd beg off, truly," she told Theo, "but Neville has already cancelled." "Pansy, I assume?" Theo said, green eyes amused. "Oh, you know about that. What do you think?" she asked curiously. "Pansy has always had terrible tastes in wizards," Theo said. "Longbottom is only a step up." He smiled. "And who am I to judge her for dating a Gryffindor?" "Maybe we can meet after dinner." Theo shook his head. "I have detention, scrubbing cauldrons." "Detention?" Hermione asked. "You still—" He gave her a warning look. "All right then, detention." He sighed. "I have to admit, this hasn't been my best weekend." He laid a cool hand on her suddenly flushed cheeks, and his lips met hers. His kiss grew rougher, his hand holding her head in place, his tongue seeking to dominate until she pulled away sharply. "Theo!" she said, looking around the entrance hall. They were attracting attention, and she thought she caught a flash of platinum hair out of the corner of her eye. "Theo!" He repeated more strongly. To hell with Hagrid's hike. They were going to resolve this right now. Both Theo's hands were on her shoulders, and he was looking down at her intently. "Theo, we need—" "Hermione!" Hagrid's voice boomed through the hall, echoing off the stonework, forming its high, pointed ceiling. "You ready?" His face brightened further. "Why not care for a hike? You'll want some stout boots, quite muddy, you know." "Hello, Professor," Theo said smoothly, letting his hands fall. "Thank you, but I'm afraid I'm too busy with schoolwork today." He tried to sound regretful.
Hagrid nodded approvingly.
Right match for Hermione, ah?
He beamed at her.
Right there, Hermione.
She nodded, resigned. Yes, of course. Theo bent to kiss her cheek. We'll talk tomorrow, he said. He could only nod again and followed Hagrid out of the castle. Pansy was absolutely right. She was rubbish with math. Hermione woke up early on Monday, absolutely determined this time. She skipped her loo. There was a time for writing and a time for action, and spent 30 minutes wrestling with her hair, trying for Astoria's coiled style and failing utterly. She finally gave up and shook Ginny awake at 7:30 with a cup of tea in one hand and a hairbrush in the other.
What?
Ginny groaned and accepted a tea with bad grace.
No, I'm not doing your hair this morning.
Ginny, you have to, Hermione begged. Look at me. I can't end things with Theo looking like this. He'd be nothing but grateful.
Good Godric, what did you do? Can we use the Wonder Diamonds?
No.
We'll braid it then,
Ginny said, tilting her head and narrowing her eyes.
Get out extra pins.
Theo wasn't waiting downstairs, which Hermione found ominous, although he smiled at her easily enough from the Slytherin table. She would do it after potions. There was half-hour break before arithmancy on Mondays, and Theo had a free period. She'd even written up a little script for the occasion, and was standing outside Ancient Ruins reviewing her lines when a voice behind her made her jump.
What you reading?
Malfoy asked in her ear. Hermione immediately crumpled up the parchment and stuffed it in her bag. Nothing, just notes. Boring notes about a nobody.
You're all wound up,
Malfoy said, eyes narrowing.
You're planning something.
She shrugged, trying not to blush. Malfoy stepped closer.
You've laid out your little scheme in your loan book, haven't you? And now you have to execute it.
His smile suddenly vanished and all colour left his face. He backed away slightly, his posture stiff.
If you have something to tell me, Hermione, just say it,
he said, firmly, eyes cold.
Say it now. I can take it.
No, it's not you, it's the... Hermione clapped her hand over her mouth, but it was too late. Malfoy's eyes lit up and he opened his mouth to speak, but McGonagall and the rest of the class appeared in the corridor to Hermione's great relief. McGonagall's lecture that morning actually referenced the Elder Foolbox for the first time, but Hermione couldn't even enjoy it. Malfoy knew what she was going to do now. She was sure of it. He was looking insufferably smug even for him. He also looked quite handsome, folded up in his little desk with his elbow sticking out. He was going to be revolting in potions. She just knew it. She was right.
You still look nervous,
Malfoy said as she dragged a stool over by the cauldron. I'm fine, and it's no concern of yours.
I know. I'll help you pack this.
Malfoy puffed out his chest.
So, sweetheart,
he said with a passable imitation of Theo's lazy drawl.
What's going on in that pretty little head of yours?
That is not how Theo... Hermione began, but shut her mouth with a snap as Lavender slid into her stool beside Malfoy.
Hello, Draco,
was all Lavender said, but her eyes held a clear message for Hermione. Mean.
Miss Brown,
Slughorn boomed, stepping up to them.
So happy to see you here, and I have another partner for you now that Mr. Weasley has left us.
He moved aside to reel Theo, who nodded politely at Lavender, then slid into Ron's former stool with a smile for Hermione. Hermione concentrated on not looking horrified. Slughorn clapped a heavy hand on Malfoy's shoulder, causing everyone at the table to jump, except for Malfoy himself, who merrily raised an eyebrow. It would take more than Slughorn to spook that man.
I expect both young men to behave like the gentlemen and Slytherins you are, eh?
Slughorn wheezed.
I expect nothing less than top marks from this table.
Malfoy's eyes twitched, like he was dying to roll them. Lavender eyed both Slytherin men nervously. Hermione just wanted to bury her head in her arms and weep. Theo alone was unperturbed.
Certainly, Professor,
he said smoothly.
Might I ask what we are brewing today, sir?
Oh, yes.
Slughorn waddled to the front of the class and raised his voice.
Today we will be concocting a delightful little potion called Rhapsody, which is commonly used in binding building materials such as marble. Our headmistress says we are running low on the Rhapsody solution due to the castle's many current construction projects, so I offered the services of our advanced potion classes.
Rhapsody was anything but delightful, the class quickly found out. Beginning early in the brewing process, the liquid would adhere to nearly anything, including cauldrons, spoons, and students. John Finnegan stuck his nose to his cauldron. Neville pasted a ladle to his forehead. Soon nearly every student was stuck to something. Hermione had 2 bottles trapped in her curls, and Malfoy couldn't get his parchment off his robes. Separation or severing charms were useless. Only an unravelly antidote could counteract the potion, and it became quickly apparent that Slughorn had an inadequate supply.
"Now, don't crowd, don't crowd!"
Slughorn cried as students mobbed his desk, covered in potion ingredients and equipment.
"Only students with stuck body parts, I'm afraid."
The class devolved into chaos, and the mood at Hermione's table became increasingly tense. Malfoy happily stirred their potion at the correct intervals, keeping up a steady pattern about demonstrating maturity and cultivating the fortitude to meet unpleasant situations head-on until Hermione wanted to hit him hard. Theo was narrowing his eyes at him, and even Lavender was staring.
"You know, Draco,"
Hermione hissed when he followed her into the supply cupboard.
"It's not too late for me to change my mind."
"Nonsense," he said serenely.
"You're way too deep."
His hands brushed hers.
"I saw you ogling me in ancient runes."
"You are vile,"
Hermione said, shoving kelp leaves into a jar. "Theo has been good to me, and I will consider his feelings for once. Now knock it off." He marched back to the table and began dividing the leaves into 2 piles. Malfoy looked inclined to protest when she gave the best leaves to Theo and Lavender, but she quelled him with a look. A loud clatter resounded through the dungeons as someone knocked over his cauldron, spilling the contents, and now 3 tables full of students were stuck to the floor. "This reminds me of Lockhart and the Doxies in 2nd year," Hermione said, carefully closing the cauldron lid on her and Malfoy's finished potion.
"I cannot believe Slughorn began this class with such a faulty mythology."
Malfoy was grumbling, tearing at the parchment stuck to his chest.
"I'll have to replace this robe."
"That's so terrible, Draco."
Lavender said, who had a cauldron lid on her head like a hat.
"Let me help you take your robe off."
Malfoy sheet like a nervous Thestral, backing away. Theo snickered loudly. He managed to avoid the potion for the most part, with only a small bit of gurdy root on his elbow. Malfoy had his wand out and was waving it as his robe while dodging Lavender, and succeeding only in floating a large pink bow over Miller Vane's head and dropping it onto their table.
"Just leave your potions in your cauldrons, everyone,"
Slughorn called.
"Any students with stuck body parts remain after class and I'll sort you out."
Theo was still chuckling, and Hermione looked up from her notations to see Lavender slyly swipe a finger on a drop of Rhapsody and reach out to Malfoy.
"Lavender, don't!"
Malfoy cried, but she was too late. Malfoy was looking intently at Theo, his wand in his left hand, and didn't notice Lavender touch his other hand.
"Oh dear,"
Lavender said, smiling.
"we're stuck."
"Merlin's balls!"
Malfoy growled, trying to pull away from her.
"Lavender, how could you?"
Hermione asked.
"Theo, stop laughing. This is all your fault, you know."
Malfoy told Hermione, who waved a hand now stuck to Lavender's in the air.
"You just had to meddle, didn't you?"
"I don't think I like your tone, Draco," Theo said, frowning.
"I don't like being stuck to a crazy bint,"
Malfoy snapped. He turned to Lavender.
"Just because I apologize, Brown, doesn't mean we're anything. We're not friends. We're not a couple. Now we are going to wait for Slughorn, and we are not going to talk at all. Do you understand?"
His voice was filled with icy hauteur, and Lavender quailed and nodded.
"And I don't want to see any more nonsense like this," Malfoy went on, "or you will be quite sorry. Understand?"
Lavender nodded again, her eyes tearing.
"Good."
Malfoy then looked across at Theo, still channeling his inner Lucius.
"And Theo, I don't give a flying fuck what you think about my tone."
The brass bell rang, signaling the end of class, and Theo cleared the messy table with his wand. Hermione eyed Malfoy and Lavender sitting side by side with their linked hands on the table. Malfoy looking thunderous.
"Let's go, Hermione. She's fine,"
Theo murmured, hand on her back as they left the table. Rhapsody, he couldn't help thinking. Easy to bind, but tough to break. Once out in the corridor, they leaned side by side against the corridor wall to recover. "Theo," Hermione said, "we absolutely have to."
"Hermione!"
Luna had stopped to smile at them in approval. The Ravenclaw had a pair of spectre specs shoved into her blonde curls and wore a string of beads that looked like eyeballs. Hermione barely suppressed a groan of frustration.
Your hair is an excellent place to keep your battles, Hermione,
Luna observed.
You might even catch some Nuggles. And Theo, that is a lovely pink bow.
Theo slapped a hand to the back of his head and began tugging.
He cried. Where did that come from?
Hermione did groan now, remembering Malfoy staring at Theo with his wand in his hand, and Romilda's pink bow on their table, undoubtedly splattered with Rhapsody. Theo's face darkened. He'd obviously come to the same conclusion.
Draco!
He shouted, storming back into the classroom, pink bow flapping. They could hear Theo's curses as well as Malfoy's sneering laugh, then a scream and the crash of what sounded like a cauldron hitting the wall, likely somewhere near Malfoy's head.
Now, Mr. Lott, calm yourself,
Zarkon cried. The potion store slammed shut.
Oh dear,
Luna said.
Was that Draco's bow? I've been telling him his wardrobe needed a spot of colour.
Hermione stared at Luna, unable to speak.
Hello, Miss Granger,
said a deep voice. Hermione and Luna turned to see Pratt towering over them. The former Slytherin's beater, square face was flushed on his bristly dark hair, and he held a charms book. Oh, hello, Mr. Pratt, Hermione said, slightly distracted by the muffled shouting that continued behind the potion doors.
Call me Rupert,
Pratt said. Hermione nodded. How are you today, Rupert?
I'm tops,
Pratt said.
I have a charms assignment,
he went on,
and I thought if anyone knows about charms, it's Miss Granger.
He smiled widely, pleased with his little quip. Charms, did you say? Hermione asked. Pratt nodded.
Oh, I thought, Miss Granger, if you weren't busy Saturday, you could help me. We could go to Hogsmeade.
Am I hearing all right?
Asked an irritated voice behind Hermione. Theo had apparently escaped from potions, leaving behind his pink bow, as well as any trace of his usual poise. Luna looked disappointed.
Pratt, did you just ask Miss Granger to Hogsmeade?
Theo demanded, face flushed. He stepped up beside Hermione.
How do you even know, Miss Granger?
Pratt also turned red, either from embarrassment or anger. I supervised one of Rupert's detentions, Hermione said, trying to defuse the situation.
Yes, and thank you for that, Miss Granger,
Pratt said.
Oh, for me, we're right glad not to be scrubbing cauldrons that night, and I just want to say, I don't want that you choked me.
You choked him?
Theo asked Hermione. Only a little, Hermione said before she thought. Theo looked shocked. Well, then she had a big mouth today.
I know I deserved it,
Pratt said.
And if you want to do it again, Miss Granger.
You should, Hermione,
Luna put in. He smiled dreamily at Theo and Hermione's aghast expression.
Some men like a little choking.
Well, I wouldn't say I like it,
Pratt said,
but if Miss Granger thinks I need it.
Do be careful, though,
Luna said, smiling at Pratt now.
It can be quite intense.
Pratt blinked at Luna, confused, but Hermione had other concerns. Theo was striding forward, clearly eager to take his frustration out on the younger but larger Slytherin. Thank you, Rupert, Hermione said, stepping between him and Theo. But I won't be able to tutor you in charms. I'll go to Hogsmeade with you. He thought quickly. It wouldn't be, proper, me being your detention supervisor and all, but thank you for asking. Pratt nodded, accepting the excuse.
All right, Miss Granger, but you can still
choke.
Rupert!
Bloom dashed over and grabbed his friend's arm.
Stop bothering Miss Granger. I'm really sorry, Miss Granger,
he said, hauling Pratt away.
You'll want a safe word, Hermione,
Luna continued placidly.
And I would recommend the presence of a third party to avoid unsafe practices.
Hermione closed her eyes, wishing she could simply die of embarrassment.
I would be happy to help,
Luna continued.
I have...
Hermione, Theo said with dangerous politeness, I'd like to know why you felt the need to choke Pratt. Yes, Hermione, said a voice behind them, imitating Theo's tone. We'd all like to know. Hermione opened her eyes, and now she was sure she'd died of embarrassment, because it was Malfoy, of course, leaning against the now open potion store and looking gleeful. Lavender walked past him out of the dungeon, not looking at anyone, and moved quickly away. Pratt and Bloom had stopped a little further down the corridor, and Theo was looking at the two with narrowed eyes. Wait, those were the beaters thrown off the Slytherin team?
Theo said to Hermione, "I thought that was just a rumour you choked them for." His eyes cut over to Malfoy. "Ah, yes, the penny drops," Malfoy said. "You'd make quite a good beater yourself, Theo. All brown, no brain." He straightened and slung his bag over his shoulder. "Choking? Aren't you the surprise, Hermione Granger?" Malfoy winked at Hermione, who was summoning all her self-control not to hex him right there. Then he strolled off, leaving Theo looking positively murderous. Hermione could only pat Theo's arm, her plans for a civilized breakup that morning gone up in Rhapsody smoke. She'd have to wait until after lunch now. Luna was sighing.
"I wish I was in your potions class, Hermione," she said.
Hermione followed Theo out of the Great Hall after lunch with an eye to finally get him alone, but lost track of him in the crowd. You'd have packed the Marauders map. They climbed up 3 sets of stairs in search of him, only to find Malfoy sitting on the 4th floor stairs with 2 squeaky mice. The scenes looked rather adorable until Hermione came close enough to overhear. "You can't show your weaknesses to bullies, Percival," Malfoy was saying. "A stinging hex is a useful response, and it's difficult to tell who caused it." Hermione strode up to him. "Mr. Malfoy!" he snapped, still peeved about his role in the scene outside potions. She turned to Percival. "Percival, if anybody bullies you, tell a teacher."
"Well, this bloke is a teacher's pet,"
Percival said, his little face scrunched up.
"Can I just hex him or punch him?"
"Violence is never the answer," Hermione answered, hands on her hips. "Really, Miss Granger?" Malfoy asked, amused. He leaned back and crossed his long legs. "I seem to remember you had a mean right hook in the 3rd year."
"You hit a bully?"
Percival asked her. She sniffed. "He deserved it." "No, he really didn't," Malfoy said. "You certainly did. You insulted Ron and then you—"
"Wait,"
said another creaky man.
"he was the bully?"
"Mr. Malfoy was a terrible, terrible bully, and you shouldn't listen to a word he says. And I would never behave that way now." Hermione told the growing group around them. "Where had they all come from?" "You held a wand to my throat just weeks ago," Malfoy put in, eyes gleaming. "You totally deserve that too, and you still haven't made that up to me, so I wouldn't."
"Miss Granger held a wand to Mr. Malfoy's throat?"
A squeaky mouse said loudly to Bertie, who had just arrived with cupcake on his shoulder.
"But I don't think he deserved it." "What was he doing?"
Bertie asked. "Yes, Miss Granger, what was I doing?" Malfoy asked innocently. Hermione flushed. "He was pressing me against the blackboard, trying to start up a secretorial affair, that's what he was doing." "Aren't you a Slytherin?" she asked one of the first years, trying to change the subject. It was the girl with the dark braids and the brother in Azkaban. "You shouldn't be here. These students are a bad influence." "They are Hufflepuffs." "Yes, but they are talking about hexing people, and you shouldn't do that," Hermione said desperately. "But, Miss Granger, you've hexed me, Petrificus Totalus," Malfoy pointed out. He waggled his eyebrows. "Tell them what I was doing." He was walking toward me while I was half-dressed. He was being himself." Hermione finally snapped and stalked off, resigned to finding Theo after his Care of Magical Creatures class.
"I think she's the bad influence,"
Percival said. To be continued. Up next, angst. So much angst. Thank you for listening to this chapter of the Gloriana set by ThebeMoon. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.